Good evening. Now, have you ever wondered how and why local councils are approving masses of hideous rabbit hutch estates to be built? These monstrosities are architecturally defecating on UK's once green and pleasant land, seemingly with full approval of the local people. Or are they? Nowadays, if you object to any proposed building development and endeavour to voice your disapproval at a public consultative meeting, there is every possibility you will come up against a form of manipulation that will take you completely out of your comfort zone. It is designed to hoodwink people into a sinister agenda without them realising it. What we plan to do this evening is show you what happens to enable you to be prepared and how to be one up on the facilitators of this agenda. In a sense, it's a short training film. Now, imagine I'm a person objecting to a planned construction of the Tony Blair Memorial Home for the criminally insane. It is advertised as a sustainable, eco-friendly development to regenerate the area and make a vital contribution to the vibrant, diverse community. In this fictitious scenario, I, along with other residents, go to the council public consultation to object to the proposal, and we are met by the local councillor who happens to be a facilitator. Now, Mark Windows will take the part of the facilitator, and I will be the innocent resident, along with many others, there to object to the proposal. Now, Mark, let's say I'm at the council with other residents and we are met by yourself, who for this exercise is a facilitator. What can we expect to happen?
Hi, I'm Mark and I'm your facilitator. I've come here tonight to talk to you about a proposed plan for the area. We just want to make sure that everyone's on board with the idea, and we want to see if there's any opposition to the idea. So everyone's going to have a fair crack of the whip, and we're going to find out what you people think, and we're going to have a series of discussions about this. We're going to bring in some experts, we're going to have some panelists, and then we're going to make our findings known to the local community.
Excellent. Oh, it sounds very democratic there, Mark. Oh, I'm really looking forward to air my objection to the Tony Blair Memorial Home for the criminally insane.
Okay, Chris, so why are you being so hostile to the idea?
Well, I'm very worried about these insane people living next door to me and being, in the community, as they say.
So who do you think should be in your community, Chris?
Local residents and people that live.
And what do you mean by local residents, Chris?
Well,
No, carry on. We've got to simulate this. We've been the victim of it many times before. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
now it's my turn.
My local residents. The sort of local community and people.
What do you define as the community, Chris?
Well, you're tying me up in knots now. Well, actually, I'm really stumbling for an answer, to be honest with you.
This is Delphi technique, Chris. This is what's been used on me time and time again, and most people will understand what's going on here. However, what I'm doing is I'm kind of reversing things back on you. So it's almost like the techniques of the Saul Alinsky method. The Saul Alinsky method was a way of making people live up to what they actually said they were going to do, but it can be used for very nefarious purposes. Now, what I was doing there, I was trying to push you into a position where you were going to have to expose yourself and say, well, people like me. Oh, you mean white people? Do you see what I'm saying? So basically, what they try and do, social engineers or people who are into behavioral science, they try and get you into a position where you are going to look bad in front of the audience because you've already voiced opposition to this new development. So as a facilitator, I think we should go back into the history of what this is about, really, and how it's meant to work, because people probably think that this thing is and was meant to be completely deceptive. Now, what we're doing here is steering people into an already intended outcome. The outcome has already been decided. So what I have to do is make it look as though everyone already agrees to it, which is what the Citizens Assembly on climate change is all about. I've looked at the papers, I've looked at how they're doing it. But what I gave you there was an example of psychology, very basic psychology that just came off the top of my head. But what you do, or what they do, is when you ask them a question, they often turn it round and make it a question to you. So they ask you a question in return. So what they're doing is they're trying to make you validate your position. And by validating your position, you will then appear to the audience to be running out of options. In other words, as a behavioral scientist, and we're going to get onto that in a minute, because I've just been looking some of this up before the show. And the behavioral scientists are all about this. They're all about, why do you make decisions? What makes your decision? Is your decision based on your life experience? Is it based on prejudice? Is it based on what you've heard today? Is it based on a long-term kind of learning, you see? Now, where a lot of this stuff falls down is when you're actually talking facts, because facts are indisputable. So you have to go in armed with facts. Now, I don't know whether you want to try this again and give some other examples before we carry on, or whether you want to get into the whole idea of what Delphi technique is, which is what was being used there. Or do you want to kind of give a few more examples? Should we do that, or what do you think? It's your call, really. You've frozen up. Okay, so it's just me, I think. I think Chris has dropped out. So we're talking about Delphi technique and what that's really about. Now, Delphi technique came out of the Rand Corporation, and it was a way of gaining what they call group consensus. So in other words, if I've got a plan that needs to be executed in the local community, then you need to make it look as though everyone's agreed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if Chris is back in the broadcast. And if he's not, I will have to wait for him to get back in, or just carry this on. So we can look at what Delphi technique is. And it's actually a way of gaining group consensus. It's a systematic interactive forecasting method. So I'm going to see if Chris is still available, and probably see you in a couple of minutes.
Okay, we're back.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Hang on, I haven't got you. No.
I'll turn my camera back on.
Okay.
Okay, Chris, what happened there?
I don't know what happened. We were just cut off, and we were going very, very well there. I'm sorry to the audience. I'm very, very sorry. It just...
Like one of those things. I just thought I was going to have to talk about Delphi technique on my own for an hour.
It's
better with an interactive method with Delphi, you see, because it's all about steering you into the intended outcome.
Well, that was brilliant, because I stumbled exactly the way as I came over very, very weak when I first come up against this. In fact, every occasion I've come up against this, it was just 3 occasions, I came over very weak because I was taken out of my comfort zone, because I got exactly the same, pushing me backwards, and I'm going, and people thought,
it's actually, that just came off the top of my head, Chris. I know we didn't plan that, but that shows you the power of reversing a question. So in other words, every question that you ask me, I ask you a question in return, and that's what these people do. It's actually really simple, but it disarms the other person, and it makes them out to be biased. That was the whole point. What I was doing there was I was steering you into a corner so that you would have to say, well, people like me, people like my parents. What do you mean people like your parents? People have lived down all their lives. Oh, do you mean just people like you, Chris? Do you see what I mean? So what they do is they use a lot of this diversity stuff, and it's a weapon. So in other words, it's not actually about equality. They use kind of weaponized strategies to attack you. Now, we should really go into what the Delphi technique was, because most people won't know what it is, but they'll kind of resonate with that first bit of what we were actually doing. Delphi technique came out of the Rand Corporation in 1953, and it was a way of gaining what they call group consensus. So if you've got a corporation and you want it to go in a certain way, you don't want too much opposition. So what you do is you bring in a kind of process where people are steered into an inevitable outcome. Now, the whole idea of Delphi technique was it was actually meant to be a method which wasn't really about steering people, but the way it's used is to steer the public into the already intended outcome. So what would happen originally when you talk about Delphi technique is they say it's a systematic interactive forecasting method, a systematic interactive forecasting method. Now that actually implies that there is already an outcome that's been planned, and there has. So what you need to do is get people that you can steer into the outcome. So if you've got a housing estate that's going to be built, you want to stop the opposition. So how do you stop the opposition? You marginalize people who are against it by using quite subversive tactics in a lot of cases, like I was doing with you, implying that you might be racist, or you might be out of touch and you might not know what you're talking about, or you might get angry and sound frustrated. Then you look weak in front of the audience. Now, I've seen all this done. Now, what happens is it's a way of kind of getting this desired outcome. And how do you do that? Well, it's a way of steering a group into this predetermined outcome. The facilitator leads the agenda, often with a co-facilitator. So I was playing the role there of the facilitator. Okay. Now, what's happened is this: the facilitator addresses the group. The facilitator is meant to be actually an intermediary, and it's not meant to be biased, but that doesn't happen in this council rollout. They're usually employed by a company, and they're usually on the side of the development, okay, or whatever's going to be built. Yes, they're there to try and steer the audience. Now, in a large group of people, the audience, the participants will be split up into small groups of 10 or 12 people and put on tables. And then what happens is a co-facilitator goes to each table, and they will take you through a steering process. So what you'll get is you'll have a series of questions, and that series of questions will be debated, and you'll write down what you think are the answers to those questions. And by a process of deduction, they slowly get rid of all the opposition or the things that they don't want. Now, that's not meant to be how the way it works. It's meant to work in a democratic way, in that people are making these decisions, and it goes to the panelists in between. So you have an expert, so-called expert panelists, and those panelists then look at the data, assess it, and move on to the next stage. You see what I mean? So it's like a process of elimination. However, what's happened is that it's an already predetermined outcome. So for instance, the citizens' assemblies on climate change, the first one was in Oxford, and the so-called panel of experts are merely lobbyists for the mitigation industry, or they're people who work for the climate change agenda. Now, in this case, you cannot question anthropogenic global warming. So you can't question the premise. So all this you're going to be talking about is how much money is going to be spent on mitigation, and how much taxation are you going to allow. So in other words, we've got to make this a climate emergency, because then people have got to panic and say, look, you can have all this money in taxation. I'll retrofit my house for £25,000 or whatever it costs, because we've all collectively got to save the environment. And this is about collectivism. And what they do with the Delphi technique is they say they're doing it to gain group consensus. Consensus doesn't mean everyone's agreed. Consensus means it's been made to look as though everyone's agreed. And the first time I saw this was at the Occupy movement. Now, we can go into the more detail on that, but I think we should recap at this point, Chris, and you just go through a few points there and ask me some questions. Maybe you could be the facilitator this time.
Well, yes, because I came over it exactly as weak in your situation. When you said, what do you mean by that, Chris? What do you mean by that? And I was going into a corner. I thought, I can't, you're following because you're out of your comfort zone. And as I said, people looking at me thinking, he's a bit weak, isn't he? Because you don't expect those sort of questions. So, I mean, it's like I can't be a facilitator because, you're brilliant at it. But what gets me?
I've never done it before. We didn't even plan it, right? But this is it's the stuff that's been used against me time and time again. So I actually know how it works. And funnily enough, it was used against a friend of mine who had a charity. And these psychological kind of subversive tactics are what is being used all the time. Yeah. And it's part of this whole rollout of what they call diversity. You see, it's all part of that. Yeah. It's about marginalization, actually. It's really about dividing groups. It's not about them coming together.
It's pointing the finger all the time, putting you into a pigeonhole. You're a Nazi, you're a racist, you're a this, you're a that. And as I was saying the other day, the Volkswagen car was invented and built during the Nazi period in Germany. After the war, the Volkswagen Beetle was one of the most popular cars. So does that mean that everybody that bought a Volkswagen Beetle was a rampant Nazi? No.
No, but this is the way it's done. It's done by association as well. And that's another thing to watch out for, because, yes, as a living being said, attack the person, ignore the argument and call it consensus. Yes, that's exactly what it is. And the interesting thing about this is that in the citizens' assemblies on climate change, they had a behavioral sciences person who works, called Nick Chater, who works for Warwick Business School. And it's the behavioral sciences are really all about how people make decisions. So in other words, what it is totally against the idea of truth and natural law. It doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. And that's what this process is all about, because originally, I don't think the idea behind Delphi technique was to mislead people. It was actually a way that you'd get a real panel of experts and you'd go through rounds of different questions, and the experts would then kind of, by a process of elimination, arrive at some kind of agreement. But this is the opposite to that, because it's steering people into a psychological process where they are being steered into the outcome. Now, I'll give you an example of how it works. If I'm a window salesman and I come into your house and I say, Chris, that window's rotten. You need a new window in there, It's only going to get worse. And to repair it is going to cost a fortune. Now, I've got a choice here today. I've got to actually refit that. It's going to cost about $2,500. But we've got a special offer on this week. It's not exactly the window that I would put in that bay, but it's a third of the price and you can have it today. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to phone up the warehouse to see if we've still got that one. And so I get on the phone and I go, really? You can have it for $750? Okay, yeah, all right, Chris, I've just been on to my boss. It's your lucky day. We've got one left. It's a discontinued line and you can have it fitted for $750. Which is a lot better than $2,500, isn't it? So which one do you want? Do you want the one for $750? If you want the one that's $2,500, which is the ideal window for that bay, well, that doesn't come in for another 2 months. So we're going through winter and you're going to have a drafty house. Why don't you just do that? You see, that's really what Delphi technique's about. It's a form of salesmanship. That's how they do it. They get you on board by eliminating the choices. So in other words, you're closing doors all the way through. So what they're doing is steering you into the intended outcome, but it's much worse than that, because they're cutting off all the other choices down the route, you see. So when you get to the end result, it's exactly what they wanted. And it's a very simple idea. It's just psychological steering. But when you get this group thing with, say, 10 tables of 10 people on each one, which I saw in South London with Piers Corbyn, we walked in and it was all about the regeneration of South London, of the Old Kent Road regeneration scheme. So the fellow from the council was actually a facilitator. We had a co-facilitator, and then he split us up into small groups. And we were all on tables, so nobody knew what was going on. The facilitators who were on the tables were all employed by a private company. So when I asked them for their personal details, they ran a mile. And the woman who was actually controlling all the facilitators when I questioned her, she said, yes, well, I'm involved in the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 rollout within Southwark Council. And so it was all being controlled from high up. Now, these facilitators were just there to get you to fill in forms and to control the narrative of the conversation. So they have certain parameters, certain questions may be brought up, but those questions will never make it to the stage where it goes to the panel. They'll be thrown out before. So anything unpopular just disappears. For instance, one fella said, well, I represent local businesses here and my business wasn't consulted. And the facilitator said, well, I'm very sorry about that because we've been in real close consultation with local businesses in the area. He said, well, that's funny because there's another 800 here that haven't been consulted. So in other words, they hadn't done a consultation with local businesses. So the whole thing is a lie. It's that you're being steered into this predetermined outcome all the time. And basically the facilitator gives an overview and he outlines these limited choices that you're going to have. The groups split into smaller groups. Questionnaires are given out to fill in, and the facilitators nod and take in the discussion points raised in the group. But it's already steered into how much more cycling do you want? How many roads do you want to see closed? Do you think there are too many rat runs? So basically, I'm throwing in questions that are decisive. I'm saying, so what we're going to do about the amount of traffic, not what we're going to do to help motorists. And then they say, but everyone's included, but motorists aren't included in this plan. You see, so it's all about cycling. How much more cycling do you want? Not how many more parking spaces are we going to get? It's never about the things that are democratic. It's about the actual agenda. And at Occupy, we can talk about that if you want, but is there anything you want to ask me before we move on there?
Yes. What I'd like to ask is how, I mean, I look at it as we're all frontline troops. This is the real problem. Whether we like it or not, we're on the front line. And if you go down to these public inquiries and whatever, you're going to be confronted with this. Now, I mean, I went down to this public inquiry and exhibition of this new mini town or village or whatever they call it near where I live. And I've never seen, I mean, my career is in drawing and architecture, and I've never seen such a bad set of plans on the wall, because any idiot will tell you that you have a little key plan and most plans are facing north. So I went up to the wall and I was looking, I think, where the hell's that? And I asked one of these sort of jolly people with, a little badge on, Simon and Mary and whatever, just give me, where is this? Hang on. And they didn't even know themselves. And those plans, people are looking at them, but not knowing where it is. It was all deliberately confusing. And what you said about these questionnaires, they're all geared. I didn't bother filling out a questionnaire. Do you want to see more cycling? Are you interested in child safety on the roads? That's another one. We need a sustainable development. That's another beauty they had. And it seemed that the cycling groups, and there was another group that seemed to be pushing this sort of agenda all the time. We need more pedestrian-friendly areas.
This is a really good point, Nat. Okay, so what you'll have dotted around the room are lobbyists for the agenda.
That's right.
And they're strategically placed. Now, when I first saw this at Occupy, I realized that it was very subversive. So what they would do is they bring in a facilitator. The facilitator then takes over. The facilitator then narrows the agenda and gives out a series of slogans, which was called the human mic, which is, what do we want? A sustainable future. When do we want it now? Whose streets? Our streets. All these meaningless mantras that we hear time and time again. These are created by social engineers. When George Soros took over the Occupy movement with the climate change agenda, started funding it, we saw general assemblies. Now we have people's assemblies. Who's actually funding the company which is rolling out the people's assemblies in the UK? It's Involve, who are funded by guess who? George Soros and the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, among others. Now, when you look into these organizations, they are part of what is being called neoliberalism or the new left. It doesn't matter what you call it. This is just a new system of governance, a totalitarian system where you don't have choice, but you have the appearance of choice. So that's what it's about. And when I first saw this first time, the facilitators were very belligerent people. They were very thick-skinned, but they weren't very bright. They were narcissistic, and they had an assumption that they were in charge to start with. They couldn't answer questions and didn't want to. They felt as though they didn't need to. Now, they were backed by co-facilitators. So what would happen at Occupy? Say there's a General Assembly, and I want to bring something up. Say, okay, I want to bring up the fact that you're kicking all the homeless people out of Occupy. Right, we write that down. It's not on the agenda, but it's been minuted for the next meeting. It will be binned and you'll never hear of it again. Okay, so that's the way it's done. It's a process of elimination. It's like a safeguarding. So in other words, say you want to get in to see somebody who's in very high office and you haven't got a pass. Okay, what do? You then try and blag your way in. That's not going to work. And this is what they're doing, is they're putting up fences so you can't get in. That's all it is. It means that unless you are part of what they're doing, then you are totally outside it, and you will be marginalized. And there's different ways they do it. So at Occupy, what happened was this woman called Saskia Kent turned up, who's now sort of disappeared off the internet a bit, but she was working for the Chamber of Commerce up in East Anglia, and also connected to the East Anglia University, which is the Hadley Research Centre for climate science. So she was involved with all that. She then started turning Occupy into climate change, and that we needed to do something about the environment. She divided and ruled everybody against each other, and Occupy turned into 12 Marxists and a dog. Right? And that was what it was. And we made a film called The Puppet Masters of Occupy, which you can see on YouTube. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's rolled out all over the world. So what happened then was Occupy General Assemblies went all over the world. And they have a facilitator and a co-facilitator. And then you get into what's happening now with Extinction Rebellion, run on exactly the same principles. So you have General Assemblies and you have facilitators. Then you have an inner core. Now, the inner core are what they're called dragons, and they're people who will be there to defend the cause. So in other words, if you start to get aggressive and a few people start backing you, so I've said, so what do you mean, Chris? What do you mean by inclusive? What do you mean by diverse? Do you mean what do you mean by your people? Do you see what I mean? Once I've done that, say you're getting the better of me, yeah? Then dragons are around the audience. So within the audience, there are planted people. And they will say, well, I think you're being very divisive, Chris. And someone else will stand up the other side, and the two will start attacking you at the same time. So you'll be attacked from 3 directions, which causes dissonance within the person. So you're going to feel even more off center, right? So you're going to start feeling really uncomfortable, be quite embarrassed by it, and also, most importantly, completely confused. And what it does is it brings in a form of dissonance to the brain. And that's what it's meant to do. It's behavioral science is behind this. And there's a fella who's a behavioral scientist who's involved in the Citizens Assembly in Oxford. I've got the paper here. And they may be believing that what they're doing is the right thing, but the whole process is totally undemocratic, and you will not have a say. That's the point. So we've got through that bit, but basically what we're looking at here is about mitigation. Mitigation for climate change is the People's Assembly on Climate Change. It's about how much the public will tolerate giving to the government, and how much of their freedom they will tolerate being taken away. And that's what it is. It's there merely to find that out. Yeah.
Well, how do we, as foot soldiers, we're in there, and say I'm the facilitator, and I'm saying, okay, Mark, you don't want the Tony Blair. Let's switch it round. So, what do you mean by local? Who do you want living near you? What aren't you? Isn't this rather selfish, not wanting this Tony Blair memorial home for the criminally insane next door to you?
There's plans for sustainable development, and also bringing in vibrant, diverse communities and unifying communities. We think it's a good idea because it will bring people in outside the area. Now, people like you, Chris, may not like that because you've lived in the area a long time, but we view that to be a very selfish argument, because there are people outside the area who need housing, and we're going to help those people. We're going to support those people. And of course, local people will have an input as well.
So how do we confront this? I mean, it's almost like it's rather like being a fly in a spider's web. Every move you make, you get yourself into a world tangle. So,
Well, it's about sticking to the point. So, in other words, if they are trying to steer you, you don't let yourself be steered. So, in other words, you stick back. No, my original point, I wasn't really talking about my views here. I was talking about the actual imposition of this on the community as a whole. So, you say you're a facilitator. Well, I would say that I'm a spokesman for my local area. And I think there's people in the room that would agree with that. Okay. So then you start saying, I've got people on my side. So in other words, you start saying, well, whose citizens' assembly is this? Because it doesn't seem to belong to the people. We've got 50 people up there who've been made to agree, but there's 250 people here who don't agree. So we're now the citizens' assembly, and you have an opinion. You may have an opinion, you may have come to a conclusion, but that conclusion is not shared by the wider community. You start using these terms, which they use, back against them, but always bring it back to the central point, because what they do is they distract you off the point all the time. So they destabilize you from what you're trying to say. So you say, no, my actual point was that it's going to be a big burden on the infrastructure. According to our survey amongst local people, they've looked at the high density of the housing, and we've looked at there's no facilitation for new nurseries, there's no new doctor's surgery, and there's no facilities for parking for the elderly. Disabled spaces seem to be taken away. So what you need to do is regain the moral high ground from them. And you can do that in the ways that they're doing it to you. In other words, you start using a little bit of their psychology against them. But what you do is you stay anchored in absolute fact. And this sounds easy to do here, but in practice, it's not as easy to do. But my recommendation is that you claim not to be affiliated with anybody. You say you're a loose group of people so that they can't say, yes, but isn't your group connected with this? And isn't your group connected with us? And isn't it anti-Muslim, or is it anti-this, or is it anti-that? You see what I mean? What they'll do is they bring in identity politics to control the narrative again. So you have to stick to your original point and say, no, use their unity, this thing that they use. You go, no, we, the people, and that's the people in this room, and you have to take your own crowd along with you, because they've only got a few of these dragons dotted around the room. Now, what you then can do is take over the debate. And what that will do ultimately is show up the Delphi technique for what it is, or show up their subversion of what is meant to be the Delphi technique, because it's a completely dishonest way of running a meeting. So if you can show that up in these kind of fairly simple ways, then people around the room will go, yeah, we're being steered. Now, that to me would be a great thing to get out on a wide scale so that people start doing it. And I've got some notes which I'll read out at the end, which is a kind of mission statement for people who want to do this and want to get involved in sort of local lobbying and try and fight back against it, because it's one template. Once that template's busted, it's busted forever. They're using a very simple procedure. It may seem complicated from the outside, but it's actually incredibly simple what they're doing. It's about obfuscation of the facts and steering people into something that they normally wouldn't want. And that's happened to most people. Most people have had a salesman in their house. Now, that analogy I gave with the window salesman is in a way not fair to window salesmen, because all they're trying to do is earn a living, right? And they're actually giving you something. They may be steering you into something, but you make the choice of whether you want the window or not. All they're doing is kind of pressuring you. That's high pressure salesmanship, which can be a form of psychological kind of intimidation, but at least they're giving you the choice. With this method, there is no choice, and that's the point. So a double glazing salesman is much more honest than somebody who's facilitating one of these meetings in your local area.
Well, a living being has just come on and just said, reverse psychology, but stick to the facts.
Always stick to the facts. And
Yes.
they usually don't have facts. So what's a really good thing to do is go in there armed with statistics. Go in
Okay.
there armed with statistics and go in there armed with a petition and say, well, you have 50 people on your People's Assembly. We have 1,000 people here who haven't been represented. So we're stating we need a new facilitator. We need a new facilitator. We need our own People's Assembly, a real People's Assembly. We need somebody from the public who represents us, and turn it around on them. Wouldn't that be funny?
Well, it would be, because what you've said tonight, I mean, as I say, that has happened to me in real life, and you really are on the, you're really standing back and you're really being cornered, and it's really embarrassing when it happens, because you think, how am I going to answer this? Because politicians, they know how to answer almost anything. But when you're Joe Public, sorry, Joe Public in the chat room, but when you're, the average bod in the street and you walk into these places, you are taken out of your comfort zone, and they know that, and that they're using that against you all the time. I mean, you go to a planning meeting, you have to, in order to speak, you've got to do it through a counsellor. Most of them don't turn up. And you have to book several weeks in advance, and you only get something like 3 minutes maximum to speak. And every hurdle possible is put against people speaking. And I've found that time and time again. And now at council meetings, where they used to all congregate in the lobby afterwards and you could speak to the councillors and that, no, boom, they disappear. They're off. They're out the back door pretty quick. They don't want to speak to the public. The public are a nuisance. Get rid of them. Have you found that, Mark?
Well, yes. I mean, that's the way it always works, because even media outlets don't use the public. I think we talked about that. Mm-hmm. So say you've got a news item and you've had some big local uprising or a riot or something, then you get the community leader coming on. You don't get a member of the public usually. You might get occasionally a member of the public say, what happened? Well, they all ran that way, and then you just cut it, right? But you'll never get any member of the public allowed to actually speak about what really happened. So you'll get a community leader, which is basically a facilitator. So they'll come on and say, well, there's been tension between the police and the local youths, and I think it's exploded tonight. I've not seen this level of violence. We're trying to work with the community, and we're trying to build community with the people who are here. And we're going to carry on fostering links between the wider community. These are the crap things they say, right? So it's a series of sound bites is then introduced. So it's the same in these council meetings. But basically, what we're talking about is limiting the outcome choices into what they want. And it's very, very simple. They're just steering you into one direction. And I've seen it with these people's assemblies. We've done several shows on it. The rollout of it is undemocratic. The input's undemocratic. And the people on their panel of experts are lobbyists. They're not experts. They're not experts. Miles Allen was on this lobbying panel for the Oxford Citizens Assembly on climate change. Now, he got recently rebuked by a judge because he'd fabricated climate data. And I think I've got it written down in here, actually. Yes, Oxford physicist Miles Allen caught out on his global warming graph, which did not show global warming. And he also misled the court with a picture, a drawing of how much CO2 in parts per million there were in the atmosphere. And the judge said, how many parts per million did you say? And he said 440. And he goes, but your diagram makes it look as though there's millions of parts, right? And he says, oh, yes, sorry about that. So this fella's deceptive from the start. And he's a climate modeler. He's not a climate scientist. He's got one climate modeler. They had a girl who looked about 18, who's basically been mentored into the principles of believing in global warming. And all of the rest of them are lobbyists. They all work for the mitigation agenda. So it's not a panel of experts, it's a panel of lobbyists. So your Citizens Assembly is not made up of a panel of experts. It's made up of a behavioral psychologist and about 10 lobbyists. So this should tell people everything they need to know. There's no democratic process going on in here. And the fact that our government has allowed this to happen and let George Soros go in above them. Remember, they're meant to be running the country. They've let George Soros run citizens' assemblies. And that means that they've gone above the national government, effectively. So what else do people need to know? You know.
Have you noticed they've all got a fixed smile? They look as if they're on a sort of toothpaste advertisement. So, hello. They're all sort of ever friendly and polite and nice to you. That's what I've found every time. They're so sickly sweet, false friendship that it's beyond belief. And you feel embarrassed because they're so over the top. I guess
well, actually, that is just the front. I mean, we've been to these meetings. There was one in Wandsworth about a year ago, and we went in there and we filmed people. We filmed members of the public, and we did some interviews, and we were told to get out, that our cameras weren't welcome. One of them actually jumped on the stage and said, there are people in here trying to disrupt the meeting. Well, we weren't. We were going in there talking to people, but they are very devious. They lie, you see. So what you have to do is stick to facts and stick to truth, because the truth will always shine through. And I think that's an important thing, because at that one in Wandsworth that me and Piers Corbyn went to, they really made fools of themselves, because I answered them back when they were on the stage doing it. I said, you are subverting this meeting. We are here talking to people who are meant to be given a voice here. And they're just voicing their opinions. And the people who are voicing their opinions are not only local residents, but also they're people who really know what they're talking about. We're talking about councillors here. We're talking about people who are community groups within the tower blocks that are going to be knocked down. These are people in local tenants associations. So why are you not allowing them to speak? So in other words, the tenants associations are the first thing they marginalise. They get in there and take them over or destroy them. So this is how it's done. It's not a complicated thing, but you're dealing with subversion. So people have to realise that this is a dishonest rollout. It's nothing to do with anything democratic or anything that they think that they will have an input in. You have no input into this. There isn't any input.
You're just manipulated, a bit like a goldfish in a goldfish bowl. You know, a goldfish thinks, well, you know, I've got freedom. You know, I can go from one side of the bowl to the other, but doesn't realise that they could be in a lake or somewhere. And I think that what annoys me though is people are easily led, and they can't. A lot of people can't really see it. And I think that the information we're giving tonight, you know, if I ask the people who do this, please share and pass this on, because our intention is for this to be like a training film, so you know what you're going to be up against. It's a bit like troops; they have to do training first on the sort of mock battlefields to know what it's going to be like. And we're sort of trying to give you a mock training film to give you some idea. But it's easier said than done, because I've been in that situation. When you're in that atmosphere, all the points, that everything's in their favour, not yours, because you're in a strange atmosphere. You don't feel at ease. You're not relaxed. And of course, most of your group will be, well, I think they've got a point there, haven't they? Yes, I think you are being a bit racist, you know. And that is the problem. People don't tend to stick together. So really, the key is probably to get 10 or 20 or as many as your really close people round you, and just sort of like stick together and move around sticking together. You know.
Well, dot them around the room so they don't look as though they're together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it's about. I mean, I found that really fascinating, looking at the Delphi technique, how it was rolled out, who was doing it, because the people who are doing it aren't very intelligent, but it's an intelligence-led operation. So the people behind it are quite intelligent, but the people who are rolling it out aren't. They're just, some of them might not even know what they're doing, because the ones in Southwark, they were just like youngsters who'd come in and been given a job as a facilitator, and they've just been given a load of forms to fill out, and they're just doing it. But once you actually put them on the spot about anything, they start panicking, because they're not used to being asked these basic questions of who are you, who do you work for, where can I contact you after today to run a mile. So, but that was a big consultation. It works on different levels. So sometimes you're going to have a room of 100 people split into 10. For instance, if you go to the Sortition website, which is part of the rollout of the Citizens' Assemblies, along with Involve and My Society, they're the three groups which are on the government website as being the three chosen organisations. Involve was chosen by 6 parliamentary select committees and is being funded mainly by George Soros. So that tells you something about the people in charge, or think they're in charge. So what you've got here is a very socially engineered rollout, which has been thought about, but it's one template everywhere. So your meetings are going to be run the same. It doesn't matter whether you're in Scotland or whether you're in Cornwall. Same rollout, doesn't change. and facilitators, co-facilitators steering it into an already predetermined outcome using basic psychology. So the way to get around it is to stick to the facts and don't get distracted off the subject. So in other words, what I was doing with you at the beginning, what you do then is you say, can we please stick to the point? It's not about me, it's about the wider community. And you could start, people should start doing this. Well, survey after survey suggests, right? This is another thing they do, right? Well, which survey? And who suggests it? There's never any references, is there? So survey after survey suggests that more people in your borough want more cycling. Well, which surveys and when were they done? Who did it? Was it Mori Ipsos? Who did the poll? So they come in with a lot of unsubstantiated data that they present as evidence. And that's another way of attacking, because what they're doing is they're giving you a lot of assumptions that aren't proven. So if they're not proven, they're just assumptions. So you say, well, your assumptions are incorrect. Today, what we need to do is we need to rectify this by asking people in the room what they really want. Now, there's no point using these pre-chosen people who've been sent a form through the post, because the majority of the borough didn't get a choice. So we demand ballots, and that's the answer. You say, well, we demand ballots. We want a ballot of everyone here today. Those people that you've chosen and steered, we don't know who they are. They may live around here, they may not. However, we're the majority, you're the minority. We're now going to start enforcing our democratic rights. You know, see how they go with that, because the last word they want to hear is something like that, you know, or democracy.
You're right. I'll tell you another thing they're doing, a little trick they're doing around my way is I've said this before, the developers are actually employing PR agents who are very clever. And what they do, they go around the estates that have just been built, not round residents that have been here for years. And they put, and I've noticed this, you look on the planning, because you can look at what people respond to on the planning website, and they put in 30 block agreements to the planned development at a time. And they're all the same. You know, I think this is fantastic. This is great. This will really rejuvenate the area. This is a great sustainable project. This will help the environment. And it's regrowth. That's another one. And it'll help local employment. There's loads of other things like that. But what the developers are doing now, they said we're going to have a lot of executive homes, quality executive homes built around us. Now, because there's been a change in the country and because of Brexit and blah, 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 they're going to actually put more homes there. And they're slightly lower grade.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, the council that have got their own property company where I am, I think there's a lot of other councils that are doing this. You think that you're going to have these snobby executive homes around you full of posh upper class people. Wrong. They're going to move several families in. And so a lot of them will maybe problem families. Who knows? Well,
what's happened, you see, when they got rid of all council housing in London, it was sold off at a thing called the Brownfield Summit in 2016. All London council housing was designated as brownfield land, which means dirty industrial wasteland. So they sold it all off with the help of Savills, the estate agents, and they brought out this report called Complete Streets. And I've got all the information on that, and we have covered it in previous shows, but it's much more relevant now as this is being rolled out on a very big scale and very quickly. But what's happened is the fact that it's a corporate system has been put in place. What we're talking about here is a corporate system. I'm just going to read you some things which give you a bit of a background here. Our Common Future was a document that came out in 1987, which was just before, obviously, the Rio Earth Summit of 1992. And these policies, these engagement policies, these public engagement ideas were being talked about then. For instance, it says equity aided by political systems that secure effective citizen participation in decision making. So we're talking about a corporate rollout here that secure effective citizen participation. Now, effective citizen participation means that they agree with you, right? It's not effective if they don't agree. Yeah, it says governments must now make the key national economic and sectoral agencies directly responsible and accountable for ensuring that their policies, programs and budgets support development that is economically and ecologically sustainable. Now, what this is all about is a combination of development and environment. It's sold as an environmental program for all the people who want to feel as though that it is good for the earth and it's good for them and we're doing something useful. So that's why it's called sustainable development. But what it is, it's a corporate takeover, an infrastructure takeover of everything. So how do you do that? Well, you can't do that with a democratic process. And this was talked about by a banker in our show, Unsaid, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development and the World Wilderness Conference of 1987. And in that, a fella called, I think it's Michael Lang, he was from a development bank in Canada. He said that this agenda cannot be rolled out democratically. It would take too long and the cannon fodder will not understand it. And what we have to do is we have to take an elitist approach and roll this out. So in other words, the cannon fodder will follow it. That's paraphrasing what he said, but that was what were the results of that World Wilderness Congress in 1987, which went into 1992. By this time, Our Common Future had come out, which was a document which outlined how this system was going to be rolled out. And of course, the rest is history. We've had the Paris Accord and all the rest of it. And we're getting now into the policies that were thought about 10 to 15 years ago, went into every council. In Waltham Forest, where I used to live, there was one councillor there called Chris Robbins, and he said 15 years ago in a council meeting, this borough is going to change irrevocably. It's going to change rapidly, and all of the plans are already in place. So a lot of those people in these local councils knew about this from a long time ago. They've also done deals with property developers. At least 100 councillors in London were known to have ties to property developers, and this happened in Harringay with the Harringay Development Vehicle. We can go on and on and on, but we're not here to do that tonight. We're here to keep it simple. So I'm just trying to give you a bit of a background that this is a corporate infrastructure takeover that's done on the back of environmentalism. And that's the important thing. It's not what it appears to be.
Well, that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, how can we sum this up, Mark? What Shelby, I won't be a facilitator, but, I mean, this is, what is actually happening is really a nightmare situation because it is a kind of form of communism, isn't it? Really, it's communitarianism.
Yeah, the word communitarianism cannot be properly defined even by Ezio Amiotzi, who invented the word. It came out of the big society really in 2010 when David Cameron announced this, and a lot of these policies came from that point, because then you've got the intelligence agencies involved in this. That sounds really weird to some people. Go, what's that got to do with the local council? Well, Demos, which is basically an arm of British intelligence, which is a public policy think tank, stated several years ago that the new democracy will work with a combination of open government infiltration and citizens groups taking direct action. Who are the citizens group taking direct action at the moment? It's Extinction Rebellion. So all of this is a controlled rollout. When they're talking about open government infiltration, they're talking about what's going on in these local council meetings. And in any meeting where you've got a group, I did a show ages ago, and it was called Grenfell Tower Agenda Explained, because I saw exactly what was going on there. The local action group gets taken over by the council. Anyone with public liability is removed from office, and the whole thing gets buried. Then what they do is they ridicule the real people there. And then they started bringing on these all ideas of Grenfell fraud, right? Undermining the original people who by this time been pushed into the background. So what you do is take over the narrative of public opinion. You put your own people in there because you don't want the public kicking up a fuss. So all of these people that you see on television and the people who are representing these organizations and corporations which are involved in the infrastructure, these are corporate lobbyists. They're nothing to do with any democratic process. When you think of it, it's very simple. Why would they want anybody getting in the way? That these plans have already been approved by the council. So they approved this in Waltham Forest, in that when the Mini Holland was rolled out, Mini Holland is this thing where all the roads are closed off. And you've got all these cycling lobby groups who were kind of brought in with the transition towns and all the Agenda 21. And loads of people were brought in, like agents were brought in. And people go, what do you mean agents? No, change agents were brought in who were lobbyists for the agenda. So if you've got, say, you're controlling a reality, and we talked about this in the New Age movement, you give them certain terms, like you give them terms like consciousness, vibration, and these very loose terms, which they then interpret for themselves, and unity, and, you know, consciousness, collective consciousness, one consciousness, all of these kind of buzzwords. Sustainable development has the same buzzwords. So yes, it's like vibrant communities, diversity, sustainable development. You know, these are the terms they use. These terms are meaningless. They have no meaning. In fact, Enrico Giovanni, who rolls out Agenda 21 to 33,000 students have gone into this in Italy so far in sustainable development, learning it at university. He said, sustainable development, what does it mean? Everything and nothing. These terms are meaningless. They've been stripped of any meaning. So what happens is you create a reality that's not a reality. So you put people inside a false reality. The thing that's outside of that is the truth. So when they're talking about sustainable development, they actually, what they're actually meaning is a mixture of environmentalism and corporatism. Okay, so they've used the environmentalism as the water, and the corporatism and the banking is the fire. So it's a meaningless term to the public. It means something to them. They think, oh, that's good. It means it's going to last. It's sustainable. It means that we're putting something back. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that there's a corporate takeover of all infrastructure, which the public have no say in. That's all it means. You have no participation in this. And the way that your consensus is gained is through this fake participation. Now, consensus doesn't mean everyone agrees. It means it looks as though everyone's agreed. It's got nothing to do with democratic rollout or whatever you want to call it. So a consensus just means something that's been arrived at. So how did they arrive at the consensus? Well, they arrived at the consensus with a mixture of psychological subversion and lying. It was very simple. And basically, say this is what happens, right? The police do this. If they want to prosecute somebody, they remove the defense evidence or destroy the defense evidence, and they stop defendants from giving evidence. And when it goes to the court, they've only got the prosecution evidence. And then things are put in to basically undermine the defendant further. So the jury then goes, oh, they must have done it. But what the jury don't know is that all of the defense evidence has been removed. And that happened in 55.5% of all examined cases by the CPS in 2017. So look, this is not something that is unusual. There's people getting put in prison for things they haven't done. I spoke to a lawyer at the time on behalf of my friend, and I said, well, what do you recommend? He said, if it goes to that particular Crown Court, I'd recommend she leaves the country. I said, but there's no evidence against her. He said, that's the way it goes. And if you get a lawyer saying that, this gives you some insight into what's going on. Now, this is no different. It just works on different levels. So we are in a totalitarian system. The government that we have has no say in this agenda. They've already signed it into legislation with the Global Action Plan and the Local Action Plan. Local Action Plans came in about the year 2000. We've seen the documents from Agenda 21 that go back to 1998. We've got the documents because the council leave them lying around. So when the council say there's an Agenda 21 conspiracy theory, no, there's an Agenda 21 conspiracy. It's not a theory. It's part of their legislation. It's now legislation. And that's the point. So what you've got here is something that appears to be very complicated, but isn't. It's very simple. You've got one choice, no choice. And it's then up to the public to realize that and do something about it. And that's where the social experimentation is really going to start, I think. Yeah.
Well, you're right. But have you noticed when you go past these building sites that are building these absolutely hideous buildings, I like the pretty signs outside that says the developer, blogs, I'm just making this up, Blogs and Sons developers working with the community. Another exciting development. That's another one.
Oh yeah, I love that when they go, new exciting 1 to 2 bedroom flats. Well, if that's exciting, then I think we've lost the term. It's unbelievable what they come out with. Yeah.
And a picture of a young couple. It's so cheap, isn't it? We're going to actually put ourselves into slavery for 50 years. How lovely. But it's always sort of, only this amount and marvelous technology and that. But what gets me is that, again, the building industry is a big lie. And I'm going off slightly at a tangent now because, and this is for another program. Has anybody ever wondered why everything else has advanced, like motor transport, if you go computers, things like that, but housing is back in the Stone Age? Go back a couple of 100 years, houses were it's only materials that got a bit modern. That's about all. And that is because the building industry has a very, very big say in government. But that's
interestingly, Chris, I went to a meeting with the architects for a development in Croydon, and Croydon is now kind of, it's the same as anywhere else with a railway line in London or outer London. It's like the density of housing is unbelievable. There's smart gulags they're building. Well, their architect was there, and there was people who'd worked on the project, and they were very nice. They were very open. But I talked about this Agenda 21 stuff, and they said, unfortunately, it's part of what we have to do. It's built into the design of every building now. We can't do anything about it. And they didn't really know why these draconian measures were being put into place. They had an idea. They knew about Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Of course they did. But the thing is, the architects and the people who were actually who'd been given the project, they were very honest about it. They were actually really nice people. We went in there to there was a fellow who's very combative, who's really ready to argue with them. And I thought it's not fair because they're just being as open as they can. Whereas these consultations about these developments are really controlled, and they're what we're talking about. So I don't think it's the developers that are at fault here. They're just kind of implementing what they've been told to do, and they're making money. Well, that's their business, right? It's the councils and the infrastructure and the people who are persuading you into this that are subversive. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, that.
But architects are really like taxi cabbies because you do a project for a client, then when you finish the project, you've got to actually find another client, or has that client got another project for you? So really, you're sort of like prostituting yourself out. And it's very, very difficult in architecture because you've always got to look for more clients or other clients and that. And that's why it's so pressurized and so stressful. And the highest number of, I think it's the highest number of professional people in lunatic asylums used to be dentists. And the second highest number was architects because it's such a high pressure business to be in. But really, we found that, in about the late 1990s, draconian rules and regulations started to come in, which was just stifled creativity and for no apparent reason. And, it was horrendous. Some of the rules and regulations, which are just stupid, that come in. And have you noticed, you can see this when you look around the buildings now. Most of them are very bland, boring, and sort of, blandness is in. And when you talk about Croydon, I haven't been there, but let me guess. The high street is full of coffee bars and kind of sterile type shops.
Yes, it's the area by the station. And what's interesting, they've started doing these new container parks. They've got one in Camden, and they're popping up all over London. And it's part of the rollout. It's kind of weird. You've got these businesses that are in these shipping containers, and that's another part of it. Container parks are going everywhere. So this is your uniformity. So you've got these corporate outlets where you've got all your different types of allowed food. You've got your Mexican, you've got your Indian, you've got your Thai, and they're all chains. So what the idea of this is a homogenization. So it is the brave new world in that respect, in that wherever you go, it's going to be the same. There's no point going anywhere because everywhere's going to be the same. And that's what they're doing to London, homogenizing it. So what that's all about is to get a blandness going. And you've got these 20-mile-per-hour zones everywhere. So if you go to Tottenham Court Road now, you don't feel like you're in London. And it's like Groundhog Day, to use that, that sort of idea, because you walk up there and then all of a sudden the shops start repeating themselves because they've run out of chain stores. So you get them starting again. I mean, how many outlets of Leon are up there? There's about 3 or 4, and you just think, I've just passed that, and it's all the same. But that's the rollout. So it's a corporate takeover of all infrastructure. So what that does, it removes individualism. Now, the idea of the Delphi technique and what we're talking about is to remove individualism, because you want everybody to be mentored into the hive mind. That's the whole point. You make it uncomfortable for people outside it. You marginalize them so that they ostracize, like I did to you at the beginning of the show. You ostracize and marginalize those people who are going to be a problem. And that's what it's all about. It's all about behavioral science. It's all about psychology, and it's fraudulent. That's what it is. It's actually fraudulent. Yeah.
We're just being conned. I mean, as I said earlier today, I was talking to Caroline, and I said, now politics is really who's got the best PR. If you can afford the best PR, if the government wanted kamikaze pilots, they'll get the best PR people in town to say, well, we want people to splatter themselves all over enemy battleships, and they would dress it all up, and you'd have people outside the recruiting office wrapping around, there'd be a queue wrapping around the corner. Oh yeah, I like to be a kamikaze pilot. I think it's fun, and that is the real problem. We're sort of sold this corporatism, and I've noticed that the high street near where I live, it's full of charity shops and multinationals, and that's it basically. The small family shops, there's about 1 or 2 just holding on by their fingernails. But
it destroys individuality and gets this cultural blandness all over the place, which is the idea. So you've got this kind of vacuum that you live in, and there's no excitement, and everyone's walking at the same speed, and you've got all the same outlets everywhere. So there's no real choice, and that's what it's about. You've got one choice, no choice, and that's what the future is. But it'd be interesting to see how the public start reacting to this. Now, just before we go, Chris, I don't know how long you wanted to carry on for, but I just wanted to read this out.
Certainly.
Basically, when you're dealing with councils and you want to set up a local group in opposition to this Delphi technique and group consensus idea, you could say this, and it's actually underneath the last video we did, which was about the New Age last night. It was called Global Citizens, I think it was called, from last night. So it's on YouTube. But this is how it goes. We are an unaffiliated group of local residents concerned about the lack of democratic process in local government planning and policy. Well, that's going to go down like a lead balloon at a Delphi consensus meeting, isn't it? They're not going to like that.
That's right.
Well, this is more to be written down when you're dealing with these people. We will remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. We are not affiliated with any group or organization whatsoever. This does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. We do not agree with arriving at a consensus through being steered into predetermined outcomes by trained facilitators, either working for the council or public-private partnerships. We deem this to be against the public interest and an affront to democracy. Now, none of those points on a theoretical or even legal level, they can't argue with any of that, because this is what they're purporting to present to you, which they don't. So you present back to them what they should be presenting to you. And that, I think, is quite a powerful way of dealing with the Delphi technique. Yeah.
Brilliant. That is, I think that should be written down somewhere, and people could.
It is written down, yeah. I use it in my slideshow, our talks, the Real Citizens Assembly. We take talks all over the country. If you want to book one, get in touch with me at info@windowsontheworld.net. Go to the website. We do them all over the place. but we're trying to start the real citizens' assemblies. That's what we're trying to do. So I do include that, and several people use it in their correspondence with councils. Now, the point is, make your own one up. Don't copy that. But it puts them on the spot. They're saying they're inclusive when they're not. They're saying all voices will be heard when they're not. Well, all you have to do is turn around and say, we want all voices to be heard. Who's we? We're the majority. We're the majority, you see. We're the people. We're the 99%. The Citizens' Assembly is funded by George Soros, or the 1%. Very simple. All about reversal. And I learned this through all this psychological abuse that I've been getting from councils for years. You know,
you had much more than me. I mean, I've had it 3 times, and that was enough. And I sort of, you know, I walked out like a little mouse. So, oh dear.
Well, what they did with me, I mean, I noticed they started lying when I had this court case against them, and they would openly and brazenly lie about what was said in court. They say, you were told in court, or you were instructed in court. And I said, no, this is what happened. This is on the court record. And they would continue with these lies. And they said, you disputed this bill. No, I didn't dispute the bill. I disputed the paperwork, which was before you wrote the new bill. I'm not disputing the bill because the bill's not relevant. The bill has no standing, as was stated in court. And they'll keep subverting and lying all the time. They're training these people to lie. They're subversive. They're going against natural law, and they're going against nature. They're going against everything that's actually true and real. So it's anybody's duty to stop them doing it. If you believe in natural law and natural processes, and you believe in truth, you need to start doing something about it. Otherwise, you're acquiescing. And by acquiescence, you're accepting what they're doing. Simple, really.
Well, I'm going to agree with a living being who's in our chat room, and he said, brilliant intro, Mark. And I agree. That was brilliant because it showed exactly what facilitators do. And it was the best ever. And I think this has been a great training film. And you've really done your homework here. You've really researched into this. And I can't thank you enough. This is absolutely fantastic.
No, it's brilliant, Chris. I'm not feeling too good tonight. I think I've been doing too much. It's been a bit worn out. I was actually going to cancel this and go, oh, Chris, I'm not up to it. But I'm a trooper. I always carry on. I'm probably a bit burned out with all this. All the excitement's getting to me, all this live streaming. It's quite exciting, actually.
Isn't it?
You know, it's a great tool to have. Yeah.
Paul Kramer's just said, my grandfather said he feared the council more than the Germans.
Well, that's all propaganda as well, isn't it? I mean, yeah, well, the council actually have more power, you see, because they can take your house off you.
Well, thank you very much. And you around this time next week?
I should be, Chris. Yeah, we can move on to other subjects, or we can get into the minutiae of detail on this subject, if you like.
Well, see what the response is. We'll see what the feedback is, because again, I ask all viewers, please share. Widely share. And I'm sorry about what happened at the beginning. My internet connection, I think, had a midlife crisis or something. I don't know what happened, or perhaps it was Big Brother.
Well, I was a bit tired, so when you disappeared, I thought, oh, I'm not going to have to carry the whole thing, am I? And I was kind of looking at my notes and thinking, oh, I'll get off air for a bit and see if Chris is still about, and we can start it again, you know.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you especially Mark, who's really worked hard on this. Terrific tonight, and thank you, and good night.
Night.